Hello, we're going to talk about Unit 12 today, Mo Modal Auxiliaries. I actually wanted this for the pronunciation, right? Auxiliary, that's a difficult word. Modal Auxiliaries number 2, the past. What does this mean? Well, in Unit 11, we were using modals to talk about the present or the future, right? So the reference in time was to present or future. But now we're going to use modals to talk about the past, right? So past reference. Now, in most cases, you're going to see that we're going to have what is sometimes called the perfect modals, right? Because we will find the modal followed by have plus a past participle. Should have done, could have done, might have done, may have done. Um, Now, this isn't always the case, right? You already know one of those examples, which is that of would, right? We'll see that in a bit, right? You can use would without have to talk about the past. Now, when you follow this unit, I strongly recommend that you also pay attention to the notes from Unit 11, right? Because there's going to be a lot of overlap, right? Also, we're going to go to these notes that are in Dropbox, right? May and might, right? Um, from Fowler, we're going to go here later, right? When we get to actually may and might. Okay, so the first entry is about the use of have to in the past, right? You remember that in Unit 11 we also started with have to as obligation, right? And in this case, this is past obligation, and I could add past external obligation, right? Because have to really strongly relates to some kind of authority, some kind of power. It needn't be an authority, right? But some instruction, something that is external, right? I had to post some letters. I didn't do this because I wanted to, right? Now, uh, we also use must in the present, but we cannot do that now, right? When we use must have in the past, the meaning is going to be inference, and um, I would strongly recommend that you cross out certainty. It says here must have refers to past certainty, and that is wrong, right? It is inference, not certainty. We'll discuss this in a bit. Um, Also remember that towards the end of Unit 11, we also discussed need, remember, and we used a need in the present, but actually in the negative form, right? We talked about you needn't do this, you don't need to do this, and you don't have to do this, remember? And I told you that we tend to associate needn't do this as coming from an authority. So a teacher may tell a student, you needn't do that. But it would be awkward for students to speak like that to a teacher, right? You needn't call me, because actually usually needn't in the present, I insist, with present reference, um, suggests that the authority comes from the speaker, right? Now we're going to use a need to talk about the past, but in a different way, right? But it is true that need and have to have some similarity, right? Now need in the affirmative will just refer to necessity, right? You need to do this, right? Possibly you need to have your hair cut, right? Which is a kind of strong recommendation. Okay, let's move on to should. And once again, when we talk about should, we also include ought, right? Now, something I never mentioned when we did Unit 11, right? When you use ought, you know that you use ought to, right? Um, you ought to apologize, you ought to have apologized in the past, right? Which is what we are seeing now. And also remember the negative form, which is oughtn't, right? Oughtn't to have been driving so fast, right? Okay. And that's, of course, the reference to ought as being not very frequent, right? Um, Okay, the first meaning that we still use with ought is with should and ought to as well, is expectation. That's a very basic meaning for should, and it stays true in the past. Um, it should have arrived, right? The parcel should have arrived. So my expectation was that it should be here by now. Now, Remember that this idea of expectation has got to do with what you think is true, right? So, um, okay. Um, now, remember that next in our notes in Unit 11, we talked about recommendation, right? I spoke about using recommendation or actually making the concept of recommendation more specific as well. It is what is desirable, what is your duty, what is proper, what is necessary, what is an obligation, um, and actually the same thing. Uh, remains true for should have in the past, right? You should have paid for the goods. Well, that's your duty. Uh, you shouldn't have told her something like that, well, because it is what is the proper thing to do. And this begins to overlap with the idea of criticism, right? You shouldn't have eaten so much last night, right? But I would like you to hold on to all of these terms, that is to say expectation, desirability, probability, duty, propriety, necessity, obligation, criticism, because they all are part of the same, right? This idea of recommendation. Usually in the negative, this will lead to criticism, right? Now we also still use should have with verbs of thinking. I should have thought, you knew, right? I should have guessed, you knew. Remember, we use guess, imagine, say, suppose, typically with should. The truth is that you can also use would, right? But the more idiomatic form is should with verbs of thinking. We'll see that maybe in a minute when we go to would. Please disregard the explanation in number 3. The past form new is an example of unreal tense. This is completely unrelated. Just disregard it. But I am interested in this concept of sequence of tenses. Remember, in Spanish, la correlación temporal. And this helps me when we talk about actually the next sentence. Remember that we saw that should is used with chance, and the same stays true for the past. It was strange, it was odd, it was funny that you should have been staying in the same hotel, right? And we use should. But remember that with unlikelihood or doubtful, it was unlikely that he would have done something like that. It was doubtful that he would have done something like that. That's a typical collocation of structures and modals. Now, think about the sentence we said earlier in English. It was strange that you should have been staying in the same hotel. Bueno, fue extraño, aunque probablemente en castellano diríamos es extraño, pero fue extraño que te hayas quedado en el mismo hotel o que te quedaras. Well, that's la correlación temporal or the sequence of tenses, but that is in Spanish, right? Es raro que te hayas quedado eh, eh, o que te quedaras. Probablemente digamos que te quedaras, right? Okay, disregard that if that is a bit confusing. Now, we also use should for polite expressions. I've done the washing up for you, or you shouldn't have, right? We use this highly idiomatic form of should in the past with ellipses. You shouldn't have done that, right? Now, not in the sense of criticism, but actually as a way of saying thank you. Oh, you shouldn't have, right? Well, this you will find something you will find in the entry for should, right? Wait. Yes, a present for me, you shouldn't have, right? That's a typical, probably you're very much acquainted with that one, right? Okay. Now we're going to move on to could have, right? And with could, well, that's a very interesting choice, actually. Could. Now, we can use could for possibility and uncertainty in the past. I could have won the race if I had tried. I could have seen Sue, uncertainty, possibility. Yes, no problem. Then once again, we can also use could have with with comparatives. We couldn't have been happier those days, right? And we use this couldn't have. I couldn't hear. Well, we'll get that to those later. I couldn't have. Couldn't have. You couldn't have left it on the bus, could you? As in possibility, right? This couldn't have happened. Um, and no, there isn't another example. The other example that you have here is we couldn't have left the dog on its own, right? And remember that was the example in Unit 11 in which we said, well, this is unwillingness, but if you just say unwillingness, the explanation is incomplete. When you say we couldn't have left the dog on its own, you mean that you were unwilling to do that because it was wrong, because you felt bad about it, right? So please remember that just saying unwillingness is not complete, right? And then this example here, couldn't have left it on the bus, is just possibility, right? Something that may or not have happened. Now, we can also use this